Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani. You're watching Daily Debrief. We're leading the show again with news from Ukraine and the region as the war continues. News coming in, a fire has broke out in a training building outside the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia in the early hours on Friday after being shelled by Russian forces, according to Ukrainian authorities. It's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe and the 9th largest in the world, with 6 reactors, each generating 950 megawatts. That's a total of 5,700 megawatts of power. Enough energy for roughly 4 million homes. In normal times, it produces 1/5 of Ukraine's entire electric production and almost half of the energy generated by the country's nuclear capabilities. Prabir Purkayastha of NewsClick joins us now. Prabir, what is your assessment of the situation as per reports and what you're reading?
From what we are reading again, that there's been no rise of background radiation, which means the nuclear facilities, the nuclear parts of the plant seem to have been completely secure and they have not been damaged in any way.
Right.
So that's one part of it. Of course,
vital.
That's a very vital part of it. And the other part of it is, of course, that it has to continue running like this. That means if the Russians have taken it over, then they have to see that it doesn't get into fighting and it remains outside the war, so to say, because any hit on that, meaning any breakdown of the nuclear power plant, and you know that they have to be protected even if they're shut down, can lead to a chain reaction of certain kind and can lead to what is the worst case scenario, as happened in Fukushima, is a core meltdown, in which case, of course, you will get a huge impact around the plant as well as in a much larger area. So like you had in Chernobyl, which was really a far worse scenario than even Fukushima. But you can see with Fukushima also the fact that now radioactivity is being released in the ocean. So this has huge consequences, and we forget when you talk about nuclear war scenarios, we forget that's only one part of the nuclear scenario. Yes, Russia is a nuclear armed weapon state, and so are the NATO countries. France has nuclear weapons, United Kingdom has nuclear weapons, and of course United States has nuclear weapons. But we also forget that nuclear reactors are also something that we have to think about. And there are a number of reactors in Ukraine. There are, I think, 15 odd reactors in Ukraine, in which Chernobyl has been shut down.
Right.
So 11 reactors or 12 reactors are actually active reactors. So given that, the war in Ukraine, the military action of Russia in Ukraine, poses a risk to all of us, particularly to the Ukrainians. And therefore, the way that this is going, that both sides, we don't see any off-ramp to the war. So therefore, when it comes to NATO, they seem to be willing to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. The Ukrainians seem to have now completely given up and aligned with the NATO countries. And they themselves do not seem to, in this scenario, looking for how to reach an agreement with Russia in terms of peace. Russia's demands being what it is, which is really on the NATO, really, that it should not come to Russia's borders. It's something the NATO has to then negotiate. Ukraine has become only a pawn at the moment. So the fact that we don't see an off-ramp to the ongoing war is an extremely dangerous situation, and I think the nuclear power plant scenario that you just talked about is a classic example of what can go wrong when you have this kind of wars going on.
Right. Prabir, we'll keep an eye on, of course, news on the reactor at Zaporizhzhia as it comes in, and we'll keep tracking that story with you. But I want to hold on to you for a minute to talk about the people who are trying to escape Ukraine. Polish nationalists have attacked and abused groups of African, South Asian and Middle Eastern people who crossed the border last night. Attackers dressed in black apparently sought out groups of non-white refugees, mainly students who had just arrived in Poland from various cities in Ukraine after the Russian military operation. According to local police, at least 3 Indians were beaten by a group of 5 men, leaving one of them hospitalized. This is not an isolated case. Prabir, why is this outbreak or this sudden sort of outpouring of violence against these students who are just trying to flee the war?
You know, we have been seeing this also in Ukraine itself, that the students from African countries and West Asian countries as well as Indians South Asians who have been trying to get onto trains, trying to cross the border. The Ukrainian civil administration has also not been very kind to them. We have all kinds of pictures which have been there. And of course, Ukraine is at war, so you can say, okay, there are some excesses there, but everybody is trying to leave. There's 1 million people who have gone into Poland.
Yeah.
So some things can happen in that. But what it also underscores what's happened in Poland, that these are not isolated incidents. There is a deep-seated racist element in Ukrainian politics, which we know about, which is what the Nazi formations there have been spreading. This is the Azov Battalion. This is the right sector. So there are groups of this kind, and unfortunately, they seem to be closely allied in terms of military training and other facilities with the Canadians, with the United States, and with the United Kingdom, who seem to have also chosen them as their conduit, so to say, in terms of arming and so on in Ukraine. So this has been a part of what was called the Maidan Revolution,
Right.
that these are the forces which were let loose, and they hold a lot of street power in Ukraine. What we see also is, of course, the counterpart of that in Poland. And let's be very clear, Poland, Romania, Hungary, as well as Ukraine, has these elements in the politics, and they have been surfacing at various points of time. The old issue with the Roma groups,
people.
which are the Roma people who probably originated from South Asia. So all of these have been there. This is the underbelly, the ugly underbelly of Western Europe and Eastern Europe, which we have known. Of course, the Jewish issue is has been much more highlighted, partly because of what the Germans did. But the point is, the pogroms against Jews were also pogroms against the Roma people, for instance. And now, as you can see, the racist underbelly of Eastern Europe is also visible. And what we are seeing is in South Asians, Indians, West Asians, as well as African students. It's just really the visual part of that. We also, as you have seen, the kind of television programs that has accompanied, talking about European people, blonde, blue-eyed, they are being attacked. This is not Asia, this is not Africa, this is not a West Asian country, civilized Europe.
Civilized parts of the world.
So assuming that other parts of the world are not civilized. So all of this we have seen, and the fact that the outpouring of sympathy in Europe for Ukraine has been there, but we have never seen this this kind of sympathy when war comes to Iraq, and it came from United States and other NATO allies. Or it came to Libya, or it came, of course, an ongoing war against the Palestinian people. And of course, we have the 20-year war against Afghanistan. So these are not worthy of that kind of sympathy. And of course, then we get also the expression. The other side of this, the sympathy, is also how you look at the quote-unquote minority populations of the world, who are actually the majority, if you take it that way. But that's what you also see.
Strangely ironic that even in India, some of these sentiments seem to be coming through, even though we are much closer. We are in one part of the world, but our sympathies seem to lie elsewhere, very anecdotally, of course. But thanks very much for taking your time out and joining us on the show today, Prabir. Moving on, President Xiomara Castro has declared Honduras a country free of open pit mining, as a measure to protect its environment. In this regard, the government announced the cancellation of the approval of all extractivist exploitation permits. According to a statement from the Ministry of Energy, Natural Resources, Environment and Mines, quite cutely named Miambiente, the decision was taken as a part of the 2022 to 2026 government program and in accordance with the principles of climate justice, respect and protection of natural resources. I spoke earlier to my colleague Zoe Alexandra for more details on why this decision was taken and what sort of impact it might have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Siddhant. This is a really important decision that was taken by the government of Xiomara Castro of the Libre Party. She was inaugurated in January of this year after winning the elections in a landslide in November 2021. One of her central campaign promises was to tackle the question of extractivism in Honduras during the 12-year period where the National Party was ruling in Honduras. After the coup, extractivism was a central point of conflict, both in terms of conflicts in the territories, but also this was a common practice of the government to give big concessions to foreign capital, to local companies, in violation of oftentimes indigenous people's rights, peasant communities' rights, Afro indigenous communities' rights, the Garifuna people. And so this is a really huge decision, really, really important by Xiomara Castro. Open pit mining, additionally, is extremely destructive for the environment. It causes vast environmental devastation, often using very harmful chemicals and completely destroying the environment there. And so this is a really big step for Honduras, taking a stand to the extractivist industry, which has really devastated the country socially, environmentally, and politically over the last 12 years. And I think it really signals that all of the, or at least many of the promises that Xiomara Castro made during her campaign are not empty promises, and that she will go forward with them. She will stand up to the de facto powers that rule inside of her country and also, foreign capital. So this is really huge.
What sort of immediate impact do you see it having on both the ecology as well as the economy?
So when this decision was announced by the Minister of Environment, they said that they would be revising. This ban is not only for future concessions that would be proposed the Minister of Environment, but also they would be reviewing past concessions. And so in Honduras, you have a series of struggles, of legal battles, and of territorial conflicts, such as the Guapinol case, such as, of course, COPIN, the Civic Council of Indigenous and Popular Organizations of Honduras, have many different struggles where they're dealing with mining concessions. And so all of these concessions will be reviewed to see if they threaten natural resources, public health, and limit access to water as a human right. And this is really huge because many of these conflicts, which see the security forces and communities at odds, oftentimes these security forces at the service of these mining companies, these conflicts hopefully will dissipate in the sense that these contracts may be canceled, they may be modified.
We know also that it was timed along with the release of the IPCC report, the second part of the IPCC report on climate change. So that's, of course, significant. But for the Honduran environmentalism in Honduras, does the timing of the ban come with any particular significance?
So one can speculate maybe this has to do with the 6-year anniversary of the assassination of indigenous environmentalist Berta Cáceres. As I mentioned, she is part of the organization, the Civic Council of Indigenous and Popular Organizations of Honduras, COPIN. She was in the moment of her assassination, her very brutal assassination at the hands of hitmen in 2016. She was engaged in a struggle with her organization, COPIN, and a local community, Rio Blanco, to defend the Gualcarque River because they wanted to build a hydroelectric project. This is part of the extractive industry. Honduras exports a large amount of energy to other companies. So they've built a lot of different hydroelectric projects in this sense. Berta was involved in the resistance to this project, and, in cahoots between the state, between local oligarchs that had investments in this project and private security companies, she was surveilled, she was followed, she was threatened, and eventually she was assassinated on March 2nd, 2016. So I think it's of great significance that Xiomara Castro is doing good on her word to protect environmentalists and their struggles to protect the environment, and commemorating, in a sense, the struggle of Berta Cáceres against the extractive industry, against foreign capital that threatens the rights of indigenous people in the country, of the peasant communities, and of Afro-Indigenous communities in Honduras.
Continuing with our environmental theme, the impact of climate change has been far greater, more frequent and disruptive than previously understood, we are now learning. Humans and natural systems are already being pushed beyond the limit of their ability to cope. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the second volume of its landmark 6th assessment report on the 28th of last month. Authored by 270 scientists, the study focuses on impact, risk, vulnerability, as well as adaptation. It states that over 3.5 billion people, that's 45% of the world's population, are living in areas highly vulnerable to climate change. Between 2010 and 20, 15 times more people died from floods, droughts, and storms in South Asia, Africa, Central and South America. Not only is climate change causing massive ecological damage, it's also led to displacement and threats to food systems and water supplies around the world. Prashant spoke earlier to D. Raghunandan of the Delhi Science Forum for more on this report.
The first thing that I'll say is this cycle of the assessment reports, starting with the first one before Glasgow, did not have the shock and awe effect that IPCC assessment reports usually have, because this cycle was preceded by three special reports released by IPCC, one on the cryosphere and the oceans, the other on changes in the land use, deforestation, desertification, and so on. And the third, and perhaps the most important of these, was on the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, which now seems to have emerged as the global target. Whereas before Glasgow,
by 1.5 cc, we mean an increase in 1.5 cc from pre-industrial era temperatures, right?
So the target at Paris was the world will try and see that temperature should be restricted, temperature rise due to climate change would be restricted to under 2 degrees Celsius. That is, 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise would be the maximum. But the Paris Agreement added that the world would also try to see that temperature rise is restricted well below 2 degrees Celsius, hopefully to 1.5 Celsius. Now it looks as if since Glasgow, 1.5 degrees Celsius has become the target. It's no longer 2 degrees Celsius, although the reason for this is that the special reports on 1.5 Celsius and the Glasgow summit have opined that even temperature rise of 1.5 triggers such serious impacts of climate change and impacts on agriculture, sea level rise, etc., that it would become intolerable for the people on Earth to allow temperatures to rise beyond 1.5. This is one aspect. The second aspect is that experts who have looked at the numbers say that if you look at the present state of play, what each country is doing, what they have promised to do, including at Glasgow, is such that it is almost impossible to reach 1.5, and that you are inevitably looking at 2 degrees Celsius. So there is a sharp contradiction here. It looks as if the science is telling you that 1.5 really should not be exceeded. But everything we are doing is ensuring that 1.5 will be exceeded. And unfortunately, what the present volume 2 of the IPCC report on impacts and vulnerability is also telling us is that impacts at 1.5 degrees Celsius will be so much that the chance of making changes and adaptations to account for and to tackle temperature rise of 1.5 will be so severe that if temperature rise goes beyond 1.5 towards 2 Celsius, it may be beyond the adaptive capacity of human communities. I think that, if you ask me, is the headline of this second report, which says that in several spheres, exceeding 1.5 will make adaptation almost impossible, and that changes would have become irreversible. For example, in the Arctic, for example, in permafrost regions, in mountain regions, where beyond certain altitudes, life would not be possible under present conditions. Animals, certain plants, etc., would not be able to grow at 20,000 feet as they do now because the temperature would be too high to do that. Similarly, on the coasts, 1.5 degrees Celsius itself would create so much sea level rise that coastal communities would find it very difficult, and that if temperature rises beyond 1.5, you may have no alternative other than to evacuate the coastal regions, because capacity to be able to cope with this sea level rise would have gone beyond ability to resist or to cope.
That's all we have on the show for today. For more details on all of these stories, please head on over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow on all the regular social media platforms. We'll be back again, same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.